Much of our lifetime is spent at work. Indeed, our economic and social well-being is derived from our work experiences. Presently, critical forces are underway that will change the nature of work as we know it today. Rapid developments in technology are creating new forms of jobs and eliminating others. Global competition is challenging us to redefine certain kinds of work. Changes in demographic patterns are creating demands for new forms of work, resulting in a workforce that acts and relates to work in a totally different way. The following are a set of videos about work and the changing nature of work. In each video, you meet an individual and hear them talk about their work, what they like, what they dislike about their work, what high performance means, changes in their work organization. I provided the people a set of questions, but what transpires is really very spontaneous in terms of how they think about their work and about the changing aspects of their work. I'd like to introduce you to Dick Sire. Dick was president of Carnegie Mellon University for more than 17 years. Most people would say that Dick is one of the real experts in organizational change in higher education. Dick and I had a series of conversations about the introduction of the Andrews system at Carnegie Mellon University. The Andrews system was one of the first large computer networks introduced in any organization.
And the computer science department had gotten an idea of connecting a number of mini computers and getting the ability to communicate with each other and to, if necessary, use the power of all of these minis for some calculations. They were not able to get any company to support them, and the idea dropped. However, I thought it was a great idea. And I talked with a number of the people that had this idea in computer science. And out of these discussions, I arrived at the position that I wanted to develop a network for the whole campus, a network that would enable us to have 10 or 12,000 computers on the network at one time, and to have this network go into the dorms, into every room really in every building that we had on campus. I thought we could do some great things educationally with such a network. I envisaged students in their rooms at 2 o'clock in the morning when most of the work gets done, being able to reach the library and get, say, an article that they wanted to reference for a paper, or maybe even to read the article. So I had, at that time, an outstanding person for academic vice president, Richard Van Horn, who was an excellent computer person. In fact, had been the co-author, I think, of the first book out on computing. And Dick and I used to spend lots of time after 5 o'clock in our offices talking about the university and ideas. And I broached this idea to him, and he liked it a lot. As they say, it resonated. And he began to do some thinking about how we might organize the university, what new institutions we might need in order to get this idea moving. But it was obvious that it was going to be an expensive idea, because we were talking about wiring this whole campus. In terms of getting the financing, we went to DEC, got a good audience with their CEO and all their top executives, and they were very interested in the idea. They recognized it as a new idea. It's maybe hard to believe that a network is a new idea, but as Paul was mentioning, in 1980, it was a brand new idea. So we waited for 2 or 3 months and never heard anything further from DEC. And I'm rather impatient, and so I called up a friend of mine who was vice president for research at IBM. And I described the idea over the phone to him and asked him whether he thought that IBM would have any interest in the idea. And he just about leaped through the phone at me and said he thought they would have a lot of interest in the idea. So we went there, presented the idea. Within a week, we had their interest, and they, and this is to emphasize how new the idea was, they wanted to do a feasibility study. They weren't certain that you could have a network of that size on. So they spent 6 months from January to June on a feasibility study and spent probably $300,000 on it and decided that it was feasible. Then we had to negotiate with them to get a contract, a really bureaucratic organization. And in October, I think of '81, we arrived at an agreement and were prepared to go ahead. Now, what had happened on the campus in the meantime was that, as I tended to do, I got out ahead of the faculty. And I gave an interview with the Chronicle of Higher Education talking about this idea. And at that time, my idea was to require every student to have a computer. And so this idea was described on the front page of the Chronicle, and a lot of inflammatory quotes from me, and the idea was launched. Well, some of the faculty hadn't heard about it yet, and they began, as is usual with faculty members, to put up resistance to the change without really looking at all of the values and benefits from it. Sometimes people say it's easier to move a cemetery than it is to move a faculty. Anyway, a lot of opposition developed. And we strategized on how to deal with this. Our first approach was to hold seminars. And when I say we, it was Dick Van Horn, myself, and Douglas Van Houweling, whom we had hired from Cornell at that time because he was intrigued with this idea. And this was, we hired him after we got the go-ahead from IBM. So we held a series of seminars in which all faculty members were invited. We held them at different parts of the campus, let all the ideas and concerns come out, try to answer them. This is an important point in terms of ways in which you break down the resistance. And this went on. As long as we were getting people, we kept holding these seminars. And they reported to me then that things were dwindling down. But there was still sniping. And so I put together a committee up by an outstanding computer scientist, Alan Newell. It had about 17 people on it, faculty members, administrators, students, staff. I gave them as their task to describe the future of computing at Carnegie Mellon. Now, one reason I chose Alan was that I knew he was obsessive about any jobs that he took. I mean, he would give 24 hours a day to it and would wipe everything else off his mind and just go at that like a bulldog. And so he took this committee, went around to each department I gave him some funding so he could have them to dinner. And he stayed there with this committee as long as there were any questions at all, long into the night if necessary. And he went to each of these departments and then wrote a report which described the future of computing, which was having a network and this decentralized computing. That was the last time there was any negative word about the idea of the network. We really, in other words, gave the opposition so much opportunity to express themselves and answered every question so that they were worn out. They no longer had anything negative, and I think were converted. Well, I think implicit in the way I described eliminating the opposition, that was maybe a little bit misleading. What I think we did there was to have redundant communication. I think that's a critical ingredient in bringing about any sort of change. In an organization, whether it's a business organization or a nonprofit organization, communication is one of the most difficult elements, and particularly communication of a new idea. And redundancy is the essence of communicating a new idea. You've got to say it over and over again in clear language to many different groups and get it into people's minds so that they begin to think it is their own idea.
But in other words,
And I think that's vital in terms of change. We had formed an organization called the ITC, the Information Technology Center. And that was the group that was to develop the programs to implement this idea of the network. We had a computer scientist as the head of the ITC, the one we hired from Xerox. And we had 10 IBM people. And these people consulted to a great extent with others on the campus, and I encouraged them to do that. We would have periodic demonstrations as they made progress, as well as discussions on what was going on. But it wasn't a case where we had everybody on campus working on trying to develop the network. We had concentrated on these 30 people in the ITC, plus at least 2 people, the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Director of Computing, Douglas Van Holling, having responsibility. And then we had these meetings. They went from 3 months to every 6 months, which I would attend, where we'd have IBM people and the Carnegie Mellon people. So it wasn't such a big coordination job as much as keeping people focused. I think it's had a major impact on Carnegie Mellon in that we have first jumped ahead of all other universities. And that was a source, I think, of real pride to both faculty and students. Nobody for many years had anything like our computer setup. And everyone was excited about being on the frontiers and being really an explorer in a new way. But I think in a practical way, it got us stimulated, and by us I mean the faculty, stimulated to try to develop new things in the classroom. And surprisingly enough, many of the innovations in the classroom using Andrew came from the College of Fine Arts. History was a real leader in developing programs. And it spread through the whole area. Physics was another pioneer in developing new programs. So we had it stimulated further the whole environmental innovation atmosphere that I wanted to create in the university. I was always disappointed in what IBM got out of the project. They were such terrific partners for us, but I always emphasized the fact to them that we would be happy to serve as a showcase for them. And I felt the project gave them a tremendous head start over other companies in terms of developing networks. But they never took advantage of it. And to the best of my knowledge, they did not really gain from the project. In the long run, the culture of the mainframe overwhelmed IBM, and they never really exploited the whole notion of networks.
My